Aspi,
Yeah.
I want to ask you, for those who may have difficulties kind of going into rebirth and reincarnation and karmic effects following from one life to another, I know that this is a controversial area. People like Stephen Batchelor have written about it. Uh, to some extent, Buddhadasa Bhikkhu in Thailand has written about it. But I struggle with this notion of reincarnation. And for the most part, I believe I can accept Buddhism, uh, and I just say I can't handle this reincarnation bit, but practically most of the other stuff I can. Do you have any reflection? And it's not an off the cuff remark that I'm making, but it's something that has been there with me for years.
Yeah, actually, if I may interrupt, I was about to ask a similar question, and I just want to attach my question to the question which Siddhartha has asked.
Sure.
One of the news items that I read this week, which has been bothering me all this week, is about this Kashmiri boy who was, his parents were, underage couple who separated, and he was abandoned at birth, and basically given up on by, mothers and father and grandparents and everyone, and then forcibly married off at the age of 12 to a girl 1 year younger to him, and he had mental illness and mental disturbances, and he committed a murder. He killed the girl, and then he went into a juvenile detention home, and and finally he's arrived at age 17, basically as the refuse of society. And this is an extreme example, but to a lesser degree perhaps, we find billions of examples like this where unless we appeal to fruits of karma from past life, there is no logical way to, and reincarnation, there's no logical within the Buddhist system to accept such a fate or a destiny, which seems which was terrifying. I just want to add this as an addendum to Siddhartha's question, where I want to reject, however much I might believe even in the reincarnation as the northern traditions stated, I want to reject it, because in practical terms, we need to take action here and now. And it becomes a cop-out for us to appeal to reincarnation to explain this kind of sadness. I would rather say that it is because of the practice of child marriage, the circumstances in Kashmir, or the situation, umpteen reasons which belong in this lifetime logically rational. Thank you.
Now, if we go to rebirth and reincarnation, and this was Walter's question also, what is the foundation and what are the arguments and so on. First of all, we have to distinguish between reincarnation and rebirth. We often use, even I sometimes, because of the practice or sort of habit of using it, in other than in Buddhism and some sects of Jainism, when say in the Hindu Sanatana Dharma, Vedanta, whatever type of Vedanta, the human, the person, the being is seen as body, mind, and soul in a very general way. And then rebirth or reincarnation is explained that just as a person puts on new clothes every day, then the soul gets a new body, like that's the clothes. And you see, periodically the soul gets a body. And what sort of body and what sort of circumstances you are born in. Again, there is karma. So you're born in a better situation or a worse situation, depending on your accumulated karma of past lives. Now, Buddhism is a little more complex. They say, no, there's no such thing as soul, because everything comes from causes and conditions. It cannot come from a God. It cannot come from a non-existent God. Therefore, there is no such thing as soul. Because if there was a soul, see, you may call anything soul. I can say, oh, this mouse is a soul. That's not so. That's not how you name things. Soul is supposed to have something to do with a creator God. Soul has something to do with being eternal. Soul has something to do as being unchanging, permanent, eternal, and so on. So that entity doesn't exist for them, for the Buddhists. So they say body and mind. Now, immediately, your next question will be, if there is no soul, what reincarnates? What takes rebirth? isn't it? So to explain this, so now obviously it's not the body, because we know what happens to the body. I mean, it becomes carbon, nitrogen, oxygen, whatever, it burns and ashes are left. So obviously it's not the body that can take rebirth. Does the mind take rebirth? If it's the mind taking rebirth, then we should, if there's a whole mind that's taking rebirth, the mind as I have my mind now, if that whole thing, entity of mind is going to go into another body, then I should be able to, that new body should be able to remember everything. But we don't know anything about our past life, mostly, by and large. So obviously it's not the entire mind that is reincarnating or taking rebirth. The Buddhists have a model of the mind which has 8 layers and sometimes 9. Now, mind you, this is only a model. It's like saying we have a model to predict how this pandemic will spread, or we have a model to believe how the universe is expanding or not, and so on. So this is a model of the mind, and they have either 8 levels or 9 levels. And we will go next time into all the levels properly if you all are interested, if you want to go into that. But let's take the 9 levels model now. So what they say is that the 8th level is something which is called the storehouse consciousness, alaya consciousness. Alaya means store, like Himalaya, storehouse of ice or snow, and Granthalaya, storehouse of books. And so alaya consciousness, alaya vijnana. So when we were talking about Walter and John and seeds of violence being planted somewhere, somewhere means what? There is no soul. It can be planted in my red blood corpuscles or, in my aorta or something like that. Those seeds or so-called are planted in the mind and in the 8th level of the mind, according to the 9-level model of Buddhism. And if you look at these 9 layers as concentric circles, then you are looking at the innermost second last circle, that is the alaya consciousness. And the 9th level, the innermost core, which the alaya consciousness surrounds, is called the amala consciousness, or the very pure consciousness, or the very, very subtle body-mind complex, which one tradition in Buddhism says Tathagata Garbha, which means the womb of the Buddhas. Some say it is Buddha nature. Some say it is the true nature of mind, which is luminous, cognitive, and so on. But that is a part which also comes from causes and conditions. So that's why it's different from soul. Because you could say, now finally you have come to the 9th level. I'll call it soul. You are calling it Buddha nature. No. It's not so simple. Everything comes from causes and conditions. So does the mind. So does the 9th level of the mind. It is, okay, it is pure, it is diamond-like, etc., etc. So Buddhism says that what goes from one life to the other life means 8th and 9th level. So actually the 9th level, propelled by the energy of the karmic imprints which are in the alaya consciousness, goes looking for an appropriate environment, which is to say a new body being created, and enters that as the 8th and 9th level of that new mind. And the other consciousnesses arise as that body grows, not when it is 2 cells inside the mother's womb. But at some point that transmigrating 8th and 9th level of mind goes. Now this brings us to another important thing which the Buddhists believe, which some scientists are slowly now coming around, but will not accept it. That the body and the mind are actually 2 things that combine in this lifetime. That while the body perishes, the mind stream actually doesn't perish, it continues. Well, you see what I'm saying. 5 senses, mind. But look at the 8th and 9th. We will analyze the others next time. Eighth and ninth is the storehouse consciousness. But more important, look at this gray area and look at the white area. So you see the five senses and the consciousness is connected with that, connected with the mind, is completely grayed out, which means it is the conscious mind, the mind that is now talking, the mind that you are listening with. But look at this, alaya and ninth, pure, 8th and 9th are totally in the white section. That is totally subconscious or unconscious. Even if you look at a sort of Freudian model. So this one, so therefore, we do not perceive, we cannot say, I can say, yes, I have a sense of smell and I have consciousness about that sense of smell. I cannot say, I can actually feel, touch, taste, and mentally and the pure consciousness or the storehouse consciousness. So this is what the Buddhists believe. Whereas the scientists will say, no. Consciousness is nothing but a function of the brain. Brain is physical body. You cremate the brain with the body, consciousness has to die. It's like a computer, but a very complex computer. If you pull out the plug, all your expensive software on the hard disk doesn't have any meaning. But as long as the computer is powered, you can have an artificial intelligence machine now. Of course, we have it already. I mean, they're all surveying us with those machines. But it appears as if, the computer is actually thinking and asking intelligent questions and making theories out of what you are speaking or buying. So, to understand this scientific problem, if you have read Roger Penrose, he's written a couple of books. So his first book was The Emperor's New Mind. It's from the Emperor's Clothes. The Emperor's New Mind, which is all about theories about the mind. And then the second book was Shadows of the Mind. Now, the Shadows of the Mind, first 3-4 chapters are understandable. But if you have done a PhD in maths, then you venture beyond the 3rd or 4th chapter because it's a completely mathematical thing after that. And I have done BSc in maths, but I can't figure that out. But I've read the first 3-4 chapters. So he actually takes this position. So one position is that if you were sitting in front of a curtain and behind the curtain, there was a human being and a computer speaking with a human voice, and you ask a question and somebody from behind the curtain answers. We are thinking of a computer which functions, now we are talking of a futuristic scenario, which functions exactly the way the human mind functions. So you would not be able to make out whether it's a computer answering or the person answering. However, Roger Penrose's thesis is in Shadows of the Mind. He has since then moved a little bit and tell you. So first there is a proposition A, which is what the materialists say. There is no consciousness beyond the functioning of hardware. That's the brain. He says, on the other hand, there is the Buddhists and the spiritualists who say mind and body are totally different. Mind can continue and so on. That's the opposite proposition. He doesn't agree with either because he's saying, even in that early days, that's about almost 15 years ago, he says, the relationship between the consciousness and the brain is such that it is not possible, even in a mind experiment, to develop a computer which can actually do the job of human consciousness. He said it's just not, it's theoretically not possible. And to support that, he has a mathematical model, which I said, unless you understand mathematics, you can get into that. But he's developed a mathematical model to demonstrate that such a computer cannot be built. Not that today we don't have the technology or today we don't have the knowledge. Why it's philosophically an impossible this thing. After that, he met some other scientists who are also working on the consciousness problem, and they have found some elements in the human brain. I forget the name. not modules, but nodules, I think. And I don't know if anybody here knows this, I mean, has read about it and they can remind me. So we know about neurons and, the gaps and those things and electrical charges and everything that happen in the brain. But they have found another element, which they say is the seat of consciousness. Now, it's still like a work in progress. So the difference between reincarnation and rebirth and what goes to the next birth is this. Now, how do you argue for this? Of course, there are many anecdotal examples of children who remember. Couple of them were investigated by the Dalai Lama and said this is genuinely
Sorry,
a case of
SP, I didn't understand what is the difference between rebirth and reincarnation.
in reincarnation is some entity which is going on from life to life. So it's easily understood. Now in rebirth, what goes is just one portion of that two levels of the mind. Okay. So the next birth is different in every way. In every way, except what is common is only the karmic imprints, which is very difficult to accept. Like even what Anil was very difficult to accept, because what you're basically saying is that if A is reborn as B in Buddhism, not reincarnation, if A is reborn as B, B is a totally different person, except the imprints that were created by A. Why should B suffer? Why should B suffer for imprints created by A? Those are not my, you see. So, but when they say rebirth, the being is still the same. They say these beings that are created, say A, B, C, all happen because of those karmic imprints. If those karmic imprints were not there, then maybe the Theravada people are right that everything is extinguished. So that's why it's different. In reincarnation, very easy. It's a soul. So whatever. So if you are suffering in your next life, it's because you are the same entity in the next. But in rebirth, you are not really the same entity. Your physical body is different. Your memories are different. Your memories don't carry forward. Of course, in some cases, the same memory goes forward, because if you say die a suddenly violent death or something very, very impressionable happens in your previous life, then some of those things also go into the alaya. And that's why when the alaya continues, therefore. So that's why, the cases that you will see, which have been sort of authenticated by people like the Dalai Lama and so on, saying, yeah, this is genuine rebirth. This little girl is in fact remembering her past life. She's not making it up, nor are the parents doing it. You can see that they died in a car accident or something like that, or one was some Roman soldier who was killed in battle. The BBC did the whole series on this at one point. Series or one long sort of serial on taking cases like this, and they spent a lot of money on those productions, because there was this person in England who claimed to be a Roman soldier some centuries ago, and he took them to a place, said this is the room where we used to keep our armor and swords and everything, and some archaeological excavations were going there, and it was too much of a coincidence, So now, but these are all still, as I said, anecdotal. They're anecdotal, and somebody's impression, this is genuine, this is not. So one sort of, so when we say, okay, just stepping one step backwards to explain the next argument, everything arises out of causes and conditions, right? Now we are saying we have a mind stream. We know we have a mind at least. So from what are the causes and conditions that goes to the next instant of consciousness? So I have this instant of consciousness. What are the causes and conditions that brings forth this instant of consciousness to my conscious levels of the mind? The previous moment of consciousness. Okay. So each subsequent moment of consciousness is brought about by the previous moment of consciousness. Now, we know there is something like this. It's like an energy which is passing on from one instant of consciousness to the next, creating it at each point. So the argument from the Buddhists is, what happens? What is the last moment of consciousness when you die? Okay. since there are causes and conditions present in that last moment of consciousness or the point of consciousness just before that, that the second last one causes the last one. Now, death. Where does the energy of that last moment of consciousness go? It must create another moment of consciousness. It cannot go anywhere else. It's like the conservation of energy, matter and energy. The body is burnt, so matter is conserved. Not in that form, becomes carbon, nitrogen, hydrogen, whatever, when it is burnt, and ash and what. But the last moment of consciousness necessarily must produce a second moment, the next moment of consciousness. And that will, and especially if you believe that that life stream has nothing to do with the body, that yes, it comes together and acts in a certain way and function in a certain way, which we call a human being, when the body and mind combine in this existence, in this period of time. But at the end, that last moment of consciousness should give rise to a next moment of consciousness. So actually the Dalai Lama says it's unscientific to say that energy or the last moment of consciousness just goes into nothingness. How can it go into nothingness? It has to go on. That is your physics is telling you that. Well, that's one argument. And again, the sort of visualization of reincarnation and rebirth. So reincarnation is like a string of pearls with a thread running through, which being the soul or whatever. Whereas rebirth in Buddhism is to be visualized as a sort of pillar or tower you have built with those alphabet blocks with which children play, you know, cubes. So you put A and then you put B and you put C, D, E, F. You create a wall or a tower with blocks on one of. Now you take any one block which is in the middle. That block is supported by the block below it, and it supports the block on top of it. But there is no connection. Physically, there is no, they just put to. So similarly, your previous life supports this life, and this life will be the cause of the next life, but there are no string running through. Then, of course, I mean, if you then anything, anyway, it ends up in a sort of faith, this thing, because. And of course, the other arguments are simply that. So one consequence of believing in rebirth and karma is there is no such thing as childhood innocence. Like the question, I don't know whether Anil is still listening. That a 2-year-old gets cancer.
I'm listening, SP. I'm here.
So that's what you say. I would like to explain this. But then you see why this child, if you say environmental, 101 arguments we can go on day and night. But the point is, if a 2-year-old child's cancer is because of previous karma, then we cannot. If you believe that, then you would not say, why should such a thing happen when innocent the child has done nothing negative in this lifetime? But then you say no. Just look at this. Let's look at this lifetime. And very often people argue this way. When they first get introduced to Buddhism, they say just look at life around you. If there is anything like karma. This man is a smuggler, black bootlegger, minister. He is so happy, man. He's got everything in life. And this struggling in that minister's office, he has got four children. He has not enough money to send two of them to school. His wife is no money for. But this man is totally honest. What sort of Buddhism is this? The one who is actually doing every minute of the day something wrong. More and more benefit. And the fellow is honestly living himself. Is suffering. So the answer to that is very simple. Yeah, this man in his previous life must have accumulated some good fruits of karma, which he's enjoying now. But what he's doing today in his next few lifetimes, you may not want to see. And that man who is suffering because he's doing a good job now, will probably succeed. And I think we will end with one story from Mullah Nasiruddin. So Mullah Nasiruddin goes to this hammam, the bath, public bath. And the first day he goes totally dressed like a beggar, hardly any clothes, this, and and then in the hammam there are these attendants who give you soap and towel and sort of help you around, and I don't know whether they give you a scrubbing or massage or what, but anyway, they attend to you in the hope of a tip, of course. And but then seeing his clothes, this man, nobody wants to attend to him, but very reluctantly somebody gives him some soap and this thing. And he, and obviously they're very insulting in their behavior and body language and all that. So he has his bath, he puts on his tattered robes, and then he gives them the biggest gold coin of the realm. So they're stunned, man. We treated him so badly. Now, gold coin, nobody carries this gold coin. It's like worth maybe $1 billion of today. So they said, okay, yeah, but then they distribute that. They say, we'll distribute this amongst ourselves. Next day, Mullah Nasiruddin comes again. This time he's dressed in velvet robes. He's got a tiara and, perfumed and everything, So they say, man, yesterday he came like a beggar and he gave us a gold coin. Today he's really come like a king. Can you imagine what tip he will give us? Everybody wants to rub him, massage him, give him fresh towels, best soap. Finally, the time comes to tip. So he says, he takes out one little copper coin with a hole in the middle, the old cheapest paisa or whatever, and gives it to them. They're quite stunned. Then they ask him, sir, we don't understand this. Yesterday you came dressed like a beggar, to be very frank, but you gave us a gold coin. Today you're dressed like a prince and you're giving me this coin. The law has nothing we can do with this. He says, what's so difficult to understand? Yesterday's gold coin was for your today's behavior. And this paisa is for your yesterday's behavior. So this is how karma works. And rebirth. So we want everything to be very logical. Abhi ka abhi, you give me my reward, But it's not linear. Buddha said karma is extremely complicated. So this is an example of the complications. So finally they realize that, So it's like that corrupt minister and the poor peon, you don't expect a logical thing to come out of karma. It is very, very complex.